I was celebrating my company's $2.3 billion valuation when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The text read, "Emergency dinner at 6 p.m. Don't be late, Mom." 20 years of absolute silence shattered in 13 words. 20 years since my own parents held a funeral service for me while I was very much alive. 20 years since they declared me dead to their community, their friends, and legally to the state of Ohio. Now they wanted dinner. The memory hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I was 18 years old, sitting in my beat-up Honda Civic outside Millerville Baptist Church, watching my own funeral through tears I couldn't stop. Inside that building, my parents, Robert and Linda Harper, stood beside a closed casket, accepting condolences from neighbors who believed their son had died in a tragic car accident on Route 35. But I wasn't dead. I was sitting in that parking lot, very much alive, watching my mother sob into tissues while my father's strong hand rested on her shoulder. The whole thing was a performance, and I was the only one who knew it. It had started 6 months earlier when I got my acceptance letter to MIT for computer science. I remember running into our kitchen waving that letter like it was a winning lottery ticket. My father was drinking his morning coffee, still in his work clothes from the night shift at Harper Construction, the family business his father had started, and his grandfather before that. "Dad, look at this full scholarship to MIT computer science program." "Fortune unto import." Robert Harper's face went stone cold. He set down his coffee mug so hard it cracked the handle. Computer science. What kind of nonsense is that? It's the future, Dad. Programming, software development, artificial intelligence. I could build something incredible. My mother Linda came downstairs, her hair still in curlers, and saw the tension immediately. She always sided with Dad. Always. "Noel Harper, you have a responsibility to this family," my father said, his voice getting louder. 3 generations of Harpers have built this construction company. You're the only son. This business is your inheritance, your future, your obligation. But I don't want to build houses, Dad. I want to build software. I want to create technology that could change people's lives. That's when he exploded. Robert Harper was a big man, 6'3", 230 pounds of muscle and fury. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "You want to sit behind a computer all day like some weakling play with gadgets while real men do real work over my dead body?" "Robert, calm down," my mother said, but I could see in her eyes she agreed with him. "No, Linda, this boy has lost his mind. Computers, technology, what a waste of a perfectly good son." For 3 months, the arguments continued. Every dinner, every conversation, every interaction became a battlefield. My parents made it clear, take over Harper Construction or lose your family forever. There was no middle ground, no compromise, no understanding. I tried everything. I showed them articles about tech companies, about young programmers making millions, about the future of digital innovation. My father would crumple up the papers and throw them in the trash. "Money isn't everything, son. Legacy is, honor is, family loyalty is." "Then why can't you be loyal to me and my dreams?" That question hung in the air like poison gas. My mother looked away. My father's face turned red with rage. "Because your dreams are selfish, Noel. They're about you, not about family, not about responsibility, not about carrying on what 3 generations of Harper men have built with their bare hands." The final confrontation happened on a Tuesday in March. I'd already accepted the MIT scholarship and planned to start in the fall. I thought maybe with time, they'd come around. I thought family love was stronger than business tradition. I was wrong. "I'm going to MIT in September, Dad. I've made my decision." Robert Harper stood up from his recliner and walked over to me. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he did something worse. "Then you're no longer my son." "Robert!" my mother gasped. "No, Linda. He's made his choice. He wants to abandon his family, abandon his heritage, abandon everything we've sacrificed to give him. Fine. But he can't have it both ways. He can't reject us and still expect us to be here when his computer dreams fall apart. You don't mean that. I mean every word. You walk out that door to chase this fantasy and you're dead to us. Dead to this family, dead to this community. We'll tell everyone you died in a car accident rather than admit we raised a son who turned his back on his family. I laughed because I thought he was exaggerating. You can't be serious. Try me. The next morning I woke up to find my bedroom empty. Every piece of clothing, every book, every personal item I owned was gone. My mother was in the backyard burning my belongings in a metal drum. 23 years of life, of memories of childhood treasures going up in smoke. Mom, what are you doing? She looked at me with tears in her eyes but didn't stop feeding my things into the fire. Your father said to clean out the room. We're turning it into storage. This is insane. I'm going to college, not joining a cult. You're abandoning your family, Noel. That's the same thing. Over the next few weeks, I watched my parents systematically erase me from their lives. They took down every family photo that included me. They removed my name from the family mailbox. They stopped answering my phone calls. Then I heard from my friend Jake that they were telling people I had died. Car accident on Route 35. Jake said, confused. But you're standing right here talking to me. They're lying, Jake. They disowned me for going to college. That's crazy, man. Nobody does that. But they did. And it got worse. 2 weeks later, Jake called me panicked. Noel, there's going to be a funeral. Your parents scheduled a funeral for Saturday. I couldn't believe it. I drove to Millerville Baptist Church and spoke to Pastor Williams. I'm sorry for your loss, Noel. Wait, you're Noel Harper. Yes, sir. Pastor Williams went pale. But your parents, they said you died in a car accident. They're having a funeral this Saturday. I'm very much alive, Pastor Williams. I don't understand. Neither did I until I hired a lawyer and discovered what they'd really done. My parents had filed a false death certificate with the help of a corrupt county clerk. They'd collected on a $50,000 life insurance policy they'd secretly taken out on me when I turned 18. They used that money plus my grandmother's inheritance that legally should have come to me to expand Harper Construction. They hadn't just disowned me. They'd committed insurance fraud and theft to profit from my symbolic death. Standing outside that church watching my own funeral, I made a decision that would define the next 20 years of my life. If Robert and Linda Harper wanted me to be dead to them, then I would be dead. But I wouldn't stay buried. I drove away from Millerville with $500 in my pocket, a 10-year-old laptop, and a burning determination to prove that their son's dreams weren't worthless fantasies. I would build something so successful, so undeniably impressive, that someday the truth would be impossible to ignore. I just never imagined it would take 20 years, or that when that day finally came, they'd reach out with a dinner invitation instead of an apology. Boston hit me like a slap of cold reality. I arrived with almost nothing, renting a studio apartment 3 blocks from the MIT campus that was smaller than my childhood bedroom. The walls were thin, the heat barely worked, and my neighbors included a rotating cast of college students who played music until 3 a.m. But I'd never been happier. My tea was everything I'd dreamed it would be. The computer science program challenged me in ways I'd never experienced. While my classmates struggled with basic programming concepts, I found myself thinking 3 steps ahead, seeing patterns and solutions that seemed obvious to me but mystified others. Professor Martinez noticed first. Noel, your approach to this algorithm problem is quite sophisticated. Have you programmed before? Self-taught, sir. I've been writing code since I was 14. Well, keep it up. You have natural instincts for this work. But natural instincts didn't pay rent or buy food. I worked 3 jobs to survive stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store, washing dishes at a campus restaurant, and tutoring struggling computer science students for $20 an hour. Most nights I got 4 hours of sleep fueled by coffee and determination. My break came during sophomore year when I noticed a security vulnerability in the software used by local businesses to process credit card payments. Instead of just pointing out the problem, I spent 2 months developing a patch that fixed the vulnerability while improving the software's efficiency. I approached Tony Russo, who owned 5 Italian restaurants around Cambridge. "Mr. Russo, your payment system has a security flaw that could cost you thousands if hackers exploit it. I can fix it for you." Tony was skeptical. "You're 19 years old, and you want to mess with my computer systems?" "I'm 20, and I don't want to mess with anything. I want to protect your business." I showed him the vulnerability demonstrated how easily someone could exploit it, then showed him my solution. Tony's face went from skeptical to worried to impressed in about 15 minutes. "How much?" $5,000 for all 5 restaurants, and I'll maintain the security updates for a year." Tony hired me on the spot. Word spread quickly through Cambridge's small business community. Within 6 months, I had 43 clients paying me to secure their digital systems. That's when I met Tom Anderson. Tom was a year ahead of me at MIT studying computer engineering with a focus on hardware optimization. He was tall and thin with prematurely gray hair and the kind of intense focus that made him perfect for detail-oriented technical work. We met in advanced algorithms class, where he was struggling with a project that seemed simple to me. "You want some help with that?" I asked, after watching him bang his head against the same problem for 2 weeks. "You think you can figure it out?" I looked at his code for maybe 10 minutes. "You're trying to force a sequential solution onto a parallel problem. Let me show you something." I rewrote his algorithm, reducing the processing time from 12 hours to 37 minutes. Tom stared at the screen. "How did you see that?" "Sometimes you have to step back and look at the whole forest instead of individual trees." We became study partners, then friends, then business partners. Tom had the engineering background to build robust hardware solutions, while I had the software development skills to create elegant, user-friendly applications. By our senior year, we were already talking about starting a company together. But first, I had something else to investigate. I hired a private investigator named Sarah Williams through a classified ad in the Boston Globe. She was a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes, and I needed to know exactly what my parents had done with my legal death. What Sarah discovered made my blood run cold. "Your parents didn't just collect on one life insurance policy, Noel. They took out 3 separate policies with different companies using your social security number and forged signatures. Total payout $137,000. They forged my signature multiple times. They also claimed your grandmother's inheritance by presenting the fraudulent death certificate to her estate lawyer. That was another $50,000. So they made $187,000 by declaring me dead. Plus, they used the fake death certificate to avoid paying the student loans they'd co-signed for your MIT education. The government wrote off $64,000 in debt because the borrower was supposedly deceased. I sat in Sarah's office, staring at the evidence spread across her desk. Financial documents, forged signatures, insurance payouts, government fraud. My parents hadn't just disowned me. They'd committed multiple felonies to profit from their decision. "This is enough evidence to put them in federal prison for 15 to 20 years, Sarah said. "What would you do, B?" Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Personally, I'd be tempted to turn them in immediately. But you're young, you're smart, and you're building something. Maybe there's a better way to get justice. Maybe you wait until you're successful enough that when the truth comes out, everyone will pay attention." That conversation changed everything. Instead of seeking immediate justice, I decided to play the long game. I would build something so successful, so undeniably impressive, that when I finally confronted my parents, they'd have no choice but to face the consequences of what they'd done. Tom and I graduated summa cum laude, and immediately started our first company, Secure Guard software. Our flagship product was an integrated security suite for small businesses that protected against cyber threats while streamlining their payment processing systems. We worked 18-hour days in a shared garage space, surviving on ramen noodles and cheap coffee. Tom handled the technical architecture, while I focused on user interface design and business development. Our first year, we made $37,000 in revenue. Our second year, we made $384,000. By our third year, we'd caught the attention of a major cybersecurity firm that offered to buy Secure Guard for $2.1 million. Tom wanted to take the offer immediately. "Noel, this is more money than either of us ever dreamed of. We could retire right now and live comfortably for the rest of our lives." But I wasn't thinking about comfortable retirement. I was thinking about the look on my father's face when he'd called my dreams worthless fantasies. "Let's take the money and build something bigger." Bigger how? Construction technology, project management software. Something that could revolutionize the entire construction industry. Tom raised an eyebrow. "You want to get into construction?" "Why?" I couldn't tell him the real reason without explaining my whole history, which I wasn't ready to do. Because it's a massive industry that's been resistant to technological innovation. If we can create software that makes construction projects more efficient, safer, and more profitable, we could capture a huge market. Tom was skeptical, but he trusted my business instincts. We sold Secure Guard and used the money to develop our next venture, a comprehensive construction management platform that could handle everything from initial project bidding to final completion. The software was revolutionary. It used artificial intelligence to optimize resource allocation, predict potential delays, and automate much of the paperwork that traditionally required dedicated project managers. Construction companies could reduce their administrative overhead by 60 to 70%, while improving project completion times by an average of 35%. We called it Build Smart, and it changed everything. Within 2 years, Build Smart was being used by major construction firms across the country. Within 5 years, it was the industry standard. Traditional construction companies that couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the new technology found themselves losing contracts to more efficient competitors. Tom and I became millionaires, then multimillionaires, then eventually billionaires. As Build Smart evolved into a complete construction technology platform. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered how Harper Construction was handling the digital revolution that was reshaping their industry. I was about to find out. Silicon Valley embraced us like conquering heroes. Tom and I moved our headquarters to Palo Alto, where Build Smart quickly became one of the most talked about tech companies in the country. We weren't just another software startup. We were disrupting a $2 trillion industry that had operated essentially the same way for decades. Our breakthrough moment came when Jackson Construction, the largest building contractor on the West Coast, agreed to pilot our software on a major shopping mall project in San Jose. The project manager, Patricia Chen, was initially skeptical. "We've been building things for 40 years without computers telling us how to do our jobs," she said during our first meeting. "We're not telling you how to do your job," I explained. "We're giving you tools to do your job better." The results spoke for themselves. The shopping mall project, originally scheduled for 18 months, was completed in 12 months and came in 15% under budget. Jackson Construction saved nearly $3 million in costs while delivering a superior product ahead of schedule. Patricia Chen became our biggest advocate. "This isn't just software," she told Construction Weekly magazine. "This is the future of building." Word spread fast. Within 6 months, we had contracts with 27 major construction firms. Within a year, that number grew to 115. Traditional construction companies faced a stark choice: adapt to Build Smart technology, or lose contracts to competitors who had embraced digital efficiency. Tom handled the technical development, while I focused on business expansion and media relations. I found myself on the cover of Forbes speaking at construction industry conferences and being interviewed on financial news programs. The construction industry has been resistant to technological innovation for decades. I told CNBC during a segment about disruptive technologies. But resistance to change doesn't make change go away. It just determines whether you'll benefit from change or be destroyed by it. The interviewer Jessica Murray pressed me on the impact our software was having on traditional construction businesses. Some critics argue that BuildSmart is eliminating jobs and forcing smaller construction companies out of business. How do you respond to that? I'd prepared for this question, but answering it still felt personal in ways I couldn't explain on television. Innovation always creates short-term disruption, but in the long run, more efficient construction means lower costs for consumers, safer working conditions for employees, and higher profits for companies smart enough to embrace new tools. The companies that survive and thrive are the ones that adapt. The ones that don't? I shrugged. That's not our responsibility. What I didn't say on camera was that every time a traditional construction company failed to adapt to our technology, I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and guilt. Satisfaction because I was proving my father wrong about the value of technology. Guilt because somewhere in Ohio, there was probably a small construction company struggling to compete in a world I'd helped create. Our IPO launched on a Tuesday in November with shares priced at $45 each. By the end of the first day of trading, BuildSmart stock was at $92 per share. Tom and I owned 68% of the company between us, making us billionaires on paper. The Forbes article came out 3 weeks later, the 34-year-old who revolutionized construction. The article detailed my rise from unknown programmer to tech billionaire, though it glossed over my background with vague references to humble beginnings in Ohio. That's when I decided it was time to investigate what had happened to Harper Construction. I called Sarah Williams, the private investigator who'd helped me years earlier. She'd started her own firm and specialized in corporate intelligence. Sarah, I need you to do a deep dive on a construction company in Ohio, Harper Construction based in Millerville. Any particular reason? Personal curiosity about how traditional construction companies are handling the digital transition. Sarah's report arrived 2 weeks later, and reading it felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Harper Construction had been steadily losing contracts for 3 years. Companies that once hired them for major projects were switching to competitors who used BuildSmart technology to deliver faster, cheaper results. Robert Harper had refused to invest in digital tools, claiming they were unnecessary complications that took focus away from real construction work. The company's revenue had dropped from $2.4 million annually to $730,000. They'd been forced to lay off 12 of their 28 employees. The family home had been mortgaged twice to keep the business afloat. But the most shocking discovery was buried on page 7 of Sarah's report. Robert Harper was suffering from early-stage heart disease, likely caused by chronic stress and overwork. Linda Harper had taken a job at a local diner to help pay bills, working 40 hours a week at age 57. The business is essentially insolvent, Sarah's report concluded. Current debts exceed assets by approximately $400,000. Foreclosure proceedings on both the business property and family home are likely to begin within the next 6 months. I stared at those words for a long time. My parents' construction company was failing specifically because they couldn't compete with companies using my technology. Their financial ruin was a direct result of my success. The irony was almost poetic. Robert Harper had called my computer science dreams worthless fantasies, and now those same fantasies were destroying his life's work. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. That's when Tom found me in my office at 11 p.m., staring out the window at the lights of Silicon Valley. "You've been weird lately," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Want to talk about it?" Tom was my closest friend, maybe my only real friend, but I'd never told him about my family. He knew I'd grown up in Ohio, that I'd come from a working-class background, but nothing about the disownment or the fake funeral. "Do you ever feel guilty about disrupting an entire industry?" I asked. "Guilty, no proud, maybe. We've made construction more efficient, safer, and more profitable for companies smart enough to use our tools. But what about the companies that aren't smart enough or can't afford to adapt?" Tom studied my face. "This is about more than business philosophy, isn't it?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with the notification that would change everything. Forbes had just published their annual Fortune 520 list of America's most powerful billionaires under 40, and I was ranked number 67. The announcement would be all over social media within hours, featured on financial news programs tomorrow morning, and discussed in business magazines for weeks. Which meant that by tomorrow, everyone in Millerville, Ohio, would know that the son Robert and Linda Harper had declared dead 20 years ago was now worth $2.3 billion. I wondered how long it would take them to reach out. The answer came faster than I expected. My phone rang at 8:37 the next morning with a number I didn't recognize, but somehow knew I'd been waiting for. "Emergency dinner at 6 p.m. Don't be late. Mom." 20 years of silence shattered in 13 words. I looked at Tom, who was reading the text over my shoulder. "Who's Mom?" he asked. For the first time in 2 decades, I was about to find out if blood was thicker than money, or if greed was thicker than both. The flight from San Francisco to Columbus took 5 hours, but the drive from the airport to Millerville felt like traveling back in time. Ohio's flat farmland stretched endlessly in every direction, broken by small towns that looked exactly the same as they had when I was 18. Nothing had changed except me. Sarah Williams met me at the rental car place, professional as always, in her dark suit and confident demeanor. Over the years, she'd become more than just my private investigator. She was one of the few people who knew my real story. "You sure about this Noel?" she asked as we drove through downtown Millerville. "Once you walk into that house, there's no going back." I stared out the window at familiar streets, unchanged storefronts, and people who might have attended my funeral 20 years ago. I've been dead to them for 2 decades. It's time to find out if resurrection is possible. The Harper family home sat at the end of Maple Street, a modest 2-story colonial that had been built in 1953. When I was a kid, it had represented everything stable and secure about my world. Now it looked smaller, shabbier, and somehow defeated. The foreclosure notice was taped prominently to the front door, impossible to miss. Bright yellow paper with bold black letters, "Notice of default and intent to foreclose." Below that, smaller print detailed a debt of $426,000 and a sale date scheduled for next month. "Your parents are about to lose everything," Sarah observed. "Good thing they taught me to be dead to family obligations." We parked across the street and waited. At exactly 5:55, I walked up the front steps I'd climbed thousands of times as a child and knocked on the door that had been closed to me for 20 years. The woman who answered was recognizable, but transformed. Linda Harper had aged hard, her face lined with stress and exhaustion. Her hair was gray, now pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the tired uniform of someone who worked long shifts for small tips. She looked at me blankly for several seconds, not quite recognizing the man her son had become. "Are you?" she began, then stopped. Her eyes went wide as recognition dawned. "Oh my God." "Hello, Mom." Behind her I heard heavy footsteps, and my father's voice calling out with irritation. "Linda, who is it? We can't afford whatever they're selling." Robert Harper appeared in the doorway, and the sight of him was shocking. The powerful, intimidating man who had dominated my childhood was gone, replaced by someone smaller, grayer, and obviously sick. His skin had an unhealthy pallor, and he moved carefully like someone nursing chronic pain. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been fear. "This isn't possible," he said quietly. "Yet here I am." My mother stepped back, gesturing for me to come inside. "Please come in. We need to talk." The interior of the house was as familiar and foreign as everything else. The same furniture, the same layout, but everything looked worn down and barely maintained. The carpet was threadbare, the wallpaper was peeling in places, and there was a musty smell that suggested ongoing moisture problems. Sarah remained outside in the car, as we'd planned. This first conversation needed to happen without witnesses or recording devices. This was about family, not legal strategy. My parents led me to the dining room, where Linda had obviously spent considerable effort preparing an elaborate dinner. The table was set with their best china, the kind they'd used only for holidays when I was growing up. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, dinner rolls, even an apple pie cooling on the counter. The sight of that familiar meal hit me harder than I'd expected. My mother had cooked my favorite dinner, the same meal she'd made for my birthday every year until I was 18. "Please sit down," Linda said, her voice shaking slightly. "I made pot roast. I remember you always loved pot roast." I sat in the chair I'd occupied for 18 years, directly across from my father's spot at the head of the table. Robert settled heavily into his chair, wincing slightly as he did. For several minutes, nobody spoke. We went through the motions of passing dishes and filling plates, but the silence was suffocating. Finally, my mother broke. "We saw the news, Forbes magazine. Your picture was on the cover. $2.3 billion? My father added, his voice carefully neutral. "That's what they estimate the company is worth, yes." Linda set down her fork and looked directly at me. "Noel, we need to talk about what happened, about the misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Robert cleared his throat. "Son, there were things said in anger 20 years ago. Things that got out of hand. We all made mistakes." I looked back and forth between them, watching them rewrite history in real time. "What kind of mistakes?" "We were hurt when you chose that college over family," Linda said. "We felt abandoned. Maybe we overreacted. You held a funeral for me. That was..." My father struggled with the words. "That was a memorial service, a way for the community to understand why you weren't around anymore. You told everyone I died in a car accident." "We told them you were gone," Linda said quickly. "People made assumptions." I could see them building a narrative that minimized their actions, that painted themselves as hurt parents who'd made understandable mistakes rather than people who'd committed fraud and abandoned their child. "Why am I here?" I asked. "Why, after 20 years of complete silence, did you suddenly invite me to dinner?" My parents exchanged a look that I recognized from childhood. It was the look they shared when they were about to ask me to do something I wouldn't want to do. Robert leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Noel, we're in trouble. The business is struggling. The economy, the competition, all these new technologies that traditional companies can't afford to learn. We're behind on the mortgage, behind on business loans. We could lose everything." "That must be difficult." "It is," Linda said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Your father works 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm working at Miller's Diner trying to help with bills. We're not asking for charity, but... Robert took a deep breath. "You're successful beyond anything we ever imagined. You've built something incredible. We're proud of you, son. And we're hoping that maybe given our history, you might be willing to help us save the family business." There it was. They weren't reaching out because they missed me or because they wanted to rebuild our relationship. They were reaching out because they needed money, and their dead son had inconveniently become a billionaire. "How much do you need?" $2 million would save the business and the house," Robert said. "We could pay you back with interest over 10 years. This would be a business investment, not charity." I looked around the dining room at the faded wallpaper and worn furniture, at my parents' carefully hopeful faces. 20 years ago, they'd declared me dead rather than accept my dreams. Now they wanted those same dreams to save them. And if I say no, the question hung in the air like smoke. Linda looked down at her plate. Robert's jaw tightened. Then I guess we'll figure something else out, my father said. But Noel, this is your heritage. This is your family. This business built the house you grew up in, paid for your education, gave you everything you had before you went off to pursue your own path. My own path that you called worthless fantasies. We were wrong, Linda said quickly. We can see that now. You've accomplished incredible things. We should have supported you instead of fighting you. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard, but it felt hollow. They weren't sorry for what they'd done. They were sorry it had been financially inconvenient. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I need to make a call. I'll be right back. I stepped outside and signaled to Sarah, who got out of the car and walked over. How's it going? She asked. They want $2 million to save the family business. They're framing it as an investment opportunity and claiming they made honest mistakes 20 years ago. No mention of the insurance fraud or false death certificate. None. They're pretending the funeral was just a memorial service and that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Sarah nodded. So they're trying to rewrite history while asking for money. Classic manipulation. Here's what I need you to do. I want you to go back to the car and call my lawyer. Have him draw up documents that give me ownership of all their outstanding debt. Every loan, every mortgage, every credit line, I want it transferred to a shell corporation by tomorrow morning. You want to own their debt? I want to control their future. If they're going to play games with the past, I'm going to set the rules for what comes next. Sarah smiled grimly. This should be interesting. I went back inside, where my parents were waiting anxiously for my answer. I've decided to help you, I said, sitting back down at the table. The relief on their faces was immediate and overwhelming. Linda actually started crying, and Robert's entire posture relaxed for the first time since I'd arrived. Thank you, son, Robert said. I knew you wouldn't abandon family when we really needed you. But there are conditions, I continued. I want to review all your financial records, business plans, and outstanding debts before I make any investment. I need to understand exactly what I'd be investing in. Of course, Linda said. Whatever you need. And I want complete transparency about what happened 20 years ago. No more euphemisms. No more calling it a misunderstanding. If we're going to rebuild this relationship, it has to be based on truth. My parents exchanged another look, this one less comfortable. Noel, my father said carefully, sometimes it's better to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past. The past is why I'm here. The past is why you needed to invite me to dinner instead of just calling your son for help. We're going to deal with the past or we're not going to deal with anything. The silence that followed was different from the earlier awkwardness. This was the silence of people realizing that the conversation wasn't going to go the way they'd planned. Finally, Linda spoke. What exactly do you want to know? Everything. Starting with why you told the entire town I was dead instead of just saying I'd moved away for college. That's when I saw the first crack in their facade. My mother's face went pale, and my father's eyes hardened with something that looked like panic. They hadn't expected me to push back. They'd expected gratitude, compliance, and a quick check that would solve all their problems. Instead, they were about to discover that their dead son had learned a few things about leverage over the past 20 years. The atmosphere in the dining room shifted like a weather front moving through. My parents' relief at my offer to help was slowly being replaced by something that looked like dread, as they realized I wasn't going to simply write a check and walk away. Noel. My mother said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. What happened 20 years ago was complicated. People were hurt. Things were said. Things were done, I corrected. Specific actions were taken. I want to understand those actions. My father's face was getting red the way it always did when he felt cornered. Son, you left us. You chose strangers at some college over your own family. We had to find a way to explain that to our friends, our community, our business partners. So you told them I died? We told them you were gone, Linda said quickly. People assumed. I pulled out my phone and opened a folder of documents I'd prepared for this moment. Photos of newspaper clippings, copies of legal documents, evidence I'd been collecting for years. This is from the Millerville Herald, dated March 15th, 20 years ago. I said, showing them the screen. Harper family mourns loss of son in tragic accident. It quotes you, Dad, saying that I died when my car hit black ice on Route 35 during a snowstorm. Robert's face went from red to pale. I don't remember exactly what I said to that reporter. And this, I continued swiping to the next document, is the death certificate filed with the state of Ohio, official document declaring Noel Harper deceased, signed by County Clerk Martin Webb. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stared at the phone screen like it contained evidence of their own murder. Linda found her voice first. We can explain. Please do. Martin Webb was a friend of your father's. When we told people you died, word got around and Martin offered to help make it official. He said it would be easier for everyone if there was paperwork to support what people already believed. Easier for everyone, or profitable for you. What do you mean? Robert asked, but his voice lacked conviction. I swiped to the next document. This is a record of insurance payouts made after my supposed death. 3 separate life insurance policies totaling $137,000, all paid out to Robert and Linda Harper as beneficiaries of their deceased son. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father's jaw tightened, and I could see him calculating how much I knew how much trouble he was in. And this, I said, showing them another document, is a record of my grandmother's inheritance, $50,000 that was legally supposed to come to me, but was instead claimed by my parents using my fraudulent death certificate. Noel. Linda said, her voice breaking. We didn't mean for it to get so complicated. At first we were just angry and hurt. But then Martin offered to help and people were offering condolences and money was tight because the business was struggling. So you decided to profit from declaring your son dead. Robert finally exploded. You walked out on us. You abandoned your family, your heritage, everything we'd built. If you wanted to be dead to us, we figured we might as well make it official. And profitable. We raised you for 18 years. We fed you clothed. You put a roof over your head. If you were going to throw all that away for some computer fantasy, then yes, we thought maybe we deserved some compensation for our investment. There it was. The truth, finally. They hadn't just disowned me. They'd decided I owed them for the cost of raising me, and they'd collected that debt by faking my death and committing insurance fraud. Computer fantasy, I repeated. That's what you called it. It was a fantasy, Robert shouted. Nobody makes money sitting behind computers. Real men do real work with their hands. I looked around the shabby dining room at the foreclosure notice I'd seen on the front door at my parents' worn clothes and tired faces. How's that working out for you? The question hit like a physical blow. Linda started crying quietly. Robert looked like he wanted to hit me. You know what your problem is, Noel, my father said, leaning forward. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else. You thought your book learning made you better than people who work for a living. I never thought I was better than anyone. I just thought I had the right to choose my own path. Your path led you away from family. Your reaction to my path led me away from family. Linda wiped her eyes and tried to regain control of the conversation. Can we please stop fighting about the past? We're family. We should be working together. Are we family? I asked. Because family members don't usually hold funerals for each other while they're still alive. We made mistakes, she said. We admit that. We were young and scared and didn't know how to handle losing you. You didn't lose me, you threw me away. Robert's anger was building again. We threw away a son who was too selfish to carry on 3 generations of family tradition. I was 18 years old. I had dreams, goals, ambitions that didn't involve swinging a hammer for the rest of my life. And look where those dreams got you, he shot back. You're rich, but you're alone. No wife, no kids, no family. You built a fortune but destroyed everything that actually matters. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. I had built an empire, but I'd done it alone. I had billions of dollars, but no one to share them with. I had achieved everything my parents said I couldn't achieve, but at the cost of everything they said I should value. At least I built something, I said. What did you build besides resentment and fraud? I built a business that employed 30 people. I built a reputation in this community. I built something real, not some computer program that nobody understands. And now it's all failing because you were too stubborn to adapt to new technology. Robert stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Get out! Robert, Linda said, alarmed. No, I mean it. Get out of our house. You came here to gloat, to rub our faces in your success while we're struggling. Well, congratulations. You won. You proved your old man wrong. Now get out. I remained seated, looking up at my father's angry face. I'm not going anywhere. Not until we finish this conversation. We are finished. 20 years ago and again right now. Actually, I said, standing up slowly, we're just getting started. That's when I pulled out my phone and called Sarah Williams. Sarah, please come inside and bring the documents. My parents looked confused as Sarah entered the house carrying a leather briefcase. She set it on the dining room table and opened it, revealing stacks of legal papers. Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet Sarah Williams. She's a private investigator and forensic accountant. She's been helping me understand exactly what happened to Harper Construction over the past few years. Sarah smiled professionally. Mr. and Mrs. Harper, I have some information that might interest you. She began laying out documents on the table. Financial records, loan agreements, foreclosure notices, credit reports. Your son asked me to investigate how traditional construction companies have been affected by new technology. Harper Construction has been particularly impacted. My mother looked at the papers with growing alarm. What is all this? These are records of your outstanding debts, Sarah explained. Business loans, equipment financing, mortgage payments, credit lines. Total amount owed $426,347. Robert sat back down heavily. We know how much we owe. What you might not know, Sarah continued, is who you owe it to. She placed a final document on the table. As of this morning, all of your outstanding debt has been purchased by Harper Holdings LLC, a subsidiary of Build Smart Technologies. My parents stared at the paper in confusion. What does that mean? Linda asked. I answered. It means I own your debt, all of it. The business loans, the mortgages, the credit lines. Every dollar you owe now belongs to me. The color drained from Robert's face. That's not possible. It's completely legal, Sarah said. Debt can be bought and sold like any other asset. Your creditors were happy to sell to a subsidiary of a Fortune 500 company. Linda looked back and forth between me and the documents. But why would you? Because 20 years ago you taught me a valuable lesson about power and control, I said. You showed me what happens when someone else gets to decide your fate. Now I get to decide yours. The room went completely silent except for the sound of my father's labored breathing. Here's how this is going to work, I continued. You have two choices. Choice one, I can call the FBI tonight and provide them with evidence of insurance fraud, inheritance fraud, and filing false death certificates. You'll both go to federal prison for 10 to 15 years. My mother gasped. Robert's face went gray. Choice two, you can accept my terms for a different kind of justice. What terms? Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Tomorrow morning you're going to call the Millerville Herald and tell them the truth about my death. Every detail. The fake funeral, the insurance fraud, the stolen inheritance. You're going to confess publicly to what you did 20 years ago. Noel, Linda pleaded. That would ruin us, our reputation, our standing in the community. You'll also cooperate with correcting the fraudulent death certificate and repaying every dollar you stole with 20 years of compound interest. We don't have that kind of money, Robert said. I know. That's why you'll sign over Harper Construction and this house to me. You can keep a small apartment and enough money to live modestly, but everything else goes toward paying your debt. My parents sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what I was offering. "The alternative," I said softly, "is federal prison. Your choice." That's when my father looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before: fear. Not anger, not disappointment, not frustration. Pure, undiluted fear. "You're our son," he said desperately. "How can you do this to us?" I leaned forward, looking directly into his eyes. 20 years ago, you told me I was dead to you. Today, I'm telling you that debt is very much alive. The silence in that dining room stretched so long, I could hear the kitchen clock ticking in the next room. My parents sat frozen, staring at the legal documents spread across the table like evidence in a criminal trial, which I realized they essentially were. My mother spoke first, her voice barely a whisper. "Noel, please, we're your parents." "Are you?" I asked. "Because parents don't usually profit from their children's deaths." Robert's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for one of the documents. "This has to be illegal. You can't just buy someone's debt without telling them." Sarah Williams answered before I could. "It's completely legal, Mr. Harper. Debt is bought and sold every day. Credit card companies, banks, collection agencies all engage in debt trading. Your creditors were perfectly within their rights to sell your obligations to Harper Holdings, LLC. But he's our son. There has to be a conflict of interest." "There would be if you were actually family," I said calmly. "But according to the state of Ohio, I've been dead for 20 years. Dead people don't have family conflicts." The irony of that statement hit my father like a physical blow. He'd used my legal death to commit fraud. Now that same legal death meant he had no family relationship to protect him. Linda was reading through the debt transfer documents, and I could see understanding dawning on her face. $426,000. We owe you $426,000. Plus interest, Sarah added helpfully. The original agreements included compound interest clauses. At current rates, the total amount continues growing by approximately $43 per day. "We can't pay that," Robert said. "You know we can't pay that." "Then you need to decide which of my options you prefer," I replied. "Public confession and debt repayment, or federal prison." My father's face was cycling through emotions, anger, desperation, calculation. I could practically see him trying to find an angle, a way to turn this situation to his advantage. "What about family forgiveness?" he asked finally. "What about mercy? What about being the bigger man?" "You mean the kind of mercy you showed when you held a funeral for your living son?" "We were hurt. You abandoned us." "I chose college. You chose fraud." Linda tried a different approach. "Noel, you're successful beyond our wildest dreams. You don't need this money. You don't need our house or our business. Why are you doing this?" It was a fair question, and answering it honestly required me to examine my own motivations. 20 years ago, you taught me that actions have consequences, I said slowly. You taught me that family loyalty has limits. You taught me that people will do terrible things when they feel threatened or disappointed. Tonight, I'm returning those lessons. "But we're sorry," Linda said, tears streaming down her face. "We admit we made mistakes. Isn't that enough?" "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." Robert stood up abruptly, his face red with renewed anger. "You know what I think? I think you planned this. I think you've been planning this for 20 years. You built your computer business specifically to destroy construction companies like ours. You wanted revenge, and you got it." I considered his accusation. Was there truth to it? Had I unconsciously built Build Smart to destroy traditional construction companies, like Harper Construction? Had some part of me always known this confrontation would happen? Maybe, I admitted. But that doesn't make you any less guilty of fraud. And it doesn't make you any less vindictive. Probably not. But vindictive people don't usually offer choices. They just destroy everything and walk away. Sarah cleared her throat. "I hate to interrupt, but we need a decision tonight. The fraud evidence has a statute of limitations, but it hasn't expired yet. If we're going to pursue criminal charges, we need to contact federal authorities soon. My parents looked at each other 27 years of marriage, allowing them to communicate without words. I watched them weighing options, calculating odds, trying to find a path that didn't end in complete disaster. If we agree to your terms, Linda asked, what exactly happens? Tomorrow morning you call the Millerville Herald and arrange an interview. You tell them everything, the fake funeral, the insurance fraud, the stolen inheritance. You explain that your son didn't die 20 years ago. You declared him dead because he chose education over family tradition. That will destroy our reputation. Your reputation was built on a lie. I'm just asking you to tell the truth. What about the business? Robert asked. Harper Construction will be dissolved. The assets will be liquidated to pay your debts. You'll be allowed to keep personal belongings and enough money to rent a small apartment. And then what we're supposed to just start over at our age. You'll figure it out. You're resourceful people. After all, you managed to profit from your son's fake death for 20 years. My mother was crying harder now, but Robert's expression had shifted from anger to something that looked almost like respect. You really did learn from us, didn't you? He said quietly. I learned that power means getting to decide who suffers and who doesn't. I learned that family loyalty is conditional. I learned that people will choose money over relationships when they think they can get away with it. And now you're choosing to make us suffer. I'm choosing to make you face consequences. There's a difference. Robert looked around the dining room at the house he'd lived in for 30 years, at the life he was about to lose. If we do this, if we confess publicly and lose everything, will that be enough? Will you be satisfied? It was another fair question. Would public humiliation and financial ruin satisfy the anger I'd carried for 20 years? Would watching my parents lose everything they'd built make up for the pain they'd caused me? I don't know, I answered honestly, but it's a place to start. Linda wiped her eyes and looked directly at me. What if we refuse? What if we choose prison instead? Then you'll go to federal prison, and I'll still end up owning your house and business when it gets liquidated to pay your debts. The only difference is that you'll spend the next 10 to 15 years in jail instead of rebuilding your lives. Sarah opened her briefcase again and pulled out 2 sets of documents. If you're going to accept Noel's terms, you need to sign these agreements tonight. They outline exactly what you're committing to, and what happens if you fail to follow through. Robert reached for one of the agreements and began reading. His hands were still shaking slightly, but his voice was steady when he spoke. This is really happening, isn't it? Our son is really going to destroy us. Your choices destroyed you, I corrected. I'm just collecting the debt. He continued reading for several minutes, Linda looking over his shoulder. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at me. You know what the strangest part of all this is, he said. What? I'm proud of you. The statement caught me off guard. What? You're ruthless. You're strategic. You're willing to do whatever it takes to get what you want. 20 years ago, I thought you were weak for choosing computers over construction. But you built an empire, and now you're using that empire to crush your enemies. That takes strength. You're my enemies now. Robert's smile was sad, but genuine. Son, we became enemies 20 years ago. Tonight is just the first time we're both honest about it. Linda signed the agreement first, her signature shaky but legible. Robert signed second, his handwriting as strong and precise as I remembered from childhood. Sarah collected the documents and placed them back in her briefcase. These agreements take effect immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Harper, you have 72 hours to contact the Millerville Herald and schedule your confession interview. My parents nodded, looking like people who'd just signed their own execution orders. I stood up, preparing to leave the house I'd grown up in for what I knew would be the final time. One more thing, I said, pausing at the dining room doorway. The pot roast was delicious, just like I remembered. Linda's face crumpled, and she began sobbing. Robert just nodded, his expression unreadable. Goodbye, Noel, he said. Goodbye, Dad. I walked out of that house feeling hollower than I'd expected. Justice had been served, debts had been called in, and consequences had been delivered. But standing in the driveway, looking back at the home where I'd spent the first 18 years of my life, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like an orphan all over again. 6 months later, I stood in the parking lot of Millerville High School, watching teenagers stream out of the building at the end of another school day. Some things never change. Kids still carried backpacks, still clustered in groups based on invisible social hierarchies, still believed they knew everything about how the world worked. I'd been like them once, convinced that talent and determination were all you needed to succeed. I'd learned since then that success requires much more strategy, patience, the willingness to make difficult choices, and sometimes the courage to walk away from everything you've ever known. The confession had run on the front page of the Millerville Herald 3 days after my dinner with my parents. Local business owners admit to insurance fraud, fake son's death. Read the headline in bold letters that made the story impossible to ignore. Linda and Robert Harper had told their story completely, holding nothing back. The insurance fraud, the stolen inheritance, the 20 years of lies that had allowed them to profit from their son's supposed death. The community's reaction had been swift and devastating. Harper Construction lost its final 3 contracts within a week. Neighbors who'd offered condolences at my funeral 20 years ago now crossed the street to avoid my parents. The local bank called in their business loan, immediately citing moral turpitude clauses that allowed them to accelerate payment terms. My parents had kept their word about everything. They'd cooperated with authorities to correct the fraudulent death certificate. They'd signed over all business and personal assets to satisfy their debts. They'd moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the poor side of town, where Robert now worked as a day laborer, and Linda continued waiting tables at Miller's Diner. But the most surprising development had been the community's reaction to my story. Principal Johnson, who'd been at Millerville High when I was a student, had called me personally. "Mr. Harper, I remember you from high school. Brilliant kid, always talking about computers when nobody else understood what you meant. I'd like to invite you to speak at our graduation ceremony." The graduation speech had led to local media interviews, which had led to a segment on state television about following your dreams despite family opposition. Somehow I'd become a symbol of succeeding against impossible odds. That's why I was back in Millerville today, standing in front of the high school preparing to announce the Harper Technology Scholarship Fund. Tom Anderson had driven up from Columbus for the ceremony. He stood beside me looking around at the small town where his business partner had grown up. "This is where it all started?" he asked. "This is where it all ended," I corrected, "and where it all began." The scholarship announcement had been my idea, but Tom had enthusiastically supported it. Every year, the fund would provide full college tuition for 5 Millerville High School graduates who wanted to pursue technology degrees despite family pressure to follow more traditional paths. "Think any of these kids will build billion-dollar companies?" Tom asked, as we watched students walking past. "I hope not. I hope they build trillion-dollar companies and put us both out of business." The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Principal Johnson introduced me to a gathering of students, teachers, and community members. I talked about following your dreams, even when nobody believes in them, about the importance of education and innovation, and about the responsibility that comes with success. What I didn't talk about was revenge or family dysfunction, or the hollow feeling that comes from winning a war against people you once loved. After the ceremony, I drove alone to Millerville Cemetery, to the plot where my grandmother was buried. She'd died 2 years after my supposed death, never knowing that her inheritance had been stolen or that her grandson was very much alive and thinking about her often. I'd brought flowers, and I placed them carefully on her headstone. "Hi, Grandma. I'm sorry it took me so long to visit officially. I came here once secretly about 10 years ago, but I wasn't ready to deal with everything then." I sat on the ground beside her grave, feeling slightly ridiculous for talking to a stone marker, but needing to say the words anyway. I learned something these past few months. Revenge doesn't taste as sweet as people say it does. Justice doesn't feel as satisfying as you expect it to. I thought confronting Mom and Dad would give me closure, but Mostly, it just made me sad. A breeze rustled the trees around the cemetery, carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass and approaching spring. They made terrible choices, Grandma. They hurt me in ways I'm still understanding. But destroying them didn't heal those wounds. It just created new ones. I pulled out my phone and showed the headstone a photo from the scholarship ceremony. I'm trying to do something positive with what happened. These kids will get opportunities that I almost didn't get because their families will know that technology careers are real and valuable. Maybe that's worth something. I sat there for a while longer thinking about choices and consequences about family and forgiveness about the difference between justice and revenge. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown local number. "Thank you for the scholarship fund. Our daughter wants to study computer engineering, and now we know it's possible. The Morrison family." 3 more similar messages arrived over the next few minutes. Parents who'd heard my story, kids who were inspired by the scholarship opportunity teachers, who were grateful for financial support for their students' dreams. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Not the destruction of the people who'd hurt me, but the creation of opportunities for people who hadn't hurt anyone. Not revenge against my parents, but support for kids who might face similar family resistance to following their dreams. I stood up, brushing grass off my pants, and said goodbye to my grandmother. Driving through downtown Millerville one last time, I passed Miller's Diner and saw my mother through the window serving coffee to customers who probably knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. She looked older, sadder, but also strangely at peace. Maybe facing consequences was better than carrying guilt. I didn't stop. On the highway back to Columbus, I called Tom. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Different. Not better exactly, but different." "Regrets." I thought about that for several miles. I regret that it had to happen this way. I regret that my parents chose money over relationships. I regret that I spent 20 years angry instead of building something positive sooner. But not regrets about confronting them. No. They needed to face consequences for what they did. I needed to stop carrying their secrets around like they were my fault. So what's next? Next, I go back to building things. But I build them for the right reasons this time. Not to prove my parents wrong, not to get revenge on people who hurt me. I build them because creating something valuable is its own reward. That conversation led to the most important realization of my life. Family isn't blood. Family is loyalty, love, and choosing each other daily. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And when you build something from nothing, make sure it's built on values that honor the person you want to be, not revenge against the people who failed you. My parents had taught me that love is conditional, that loyalty can be bought and sold, that family ties can be severed for financial gain. But I'd learned something different from the people who'd supported my journey. Tom Anderson, Sarah Williams, the investors who'd believed in Build Smart, even the scholarship recipients who were just starting their own adventures. Real family chooses you, supports your dreams, and celebrates your success without demanding ownership of your achievements. Real family doesn't hold funerals for living people or profit from fake grief. The Harper Technology Scholarship Fund has now supported 47 students over 5 years. 3 have started their own companies. 1 developed a medical device that's helping cancer patients. Another created an app that's improving literacy rates in rural communities. None of them had to choose between family and dreams, because their families knew from my story that technology careers are real and valuable. That's my legacy, not the billions of dollars in my bank account, not the destruction of my parents' lives, not the revenge that consumed 20 years of my energy. My legacy is 47 young people who got to pursue their dreams without having to sacrifice their families or lose themselves in anger. Sometimes the best way to heal from family dysfunction is to create a better family for the next generation. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and personal dreams? How did you handle the pressure to conform to other people's vision of your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with anyone who might be struggling with similar family conflicts. And subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and building success despite impossible odds. Thank you for listening to my journey. I hope it helps you understand that your dreams are valid even when the people closest to you don't understand them. Sometimes the family that loves you best is the one you choose to build, not the one you're born into. Keep building something beautiful with your life. And remember that success is sweetest when it's shared with people who truly want you to succeed.